Well, first of all, being the Hugh Ramsay Chair of Australian Art, it means that, in a sense, I've been hired or been asked to think about the idea of Australian art as a national art. And the way the whole idea of Australian art has been thought by art historians and curators has been as a national tradition. So every book you pick up called The History of Australian Art is not the history of every artist in Australia. It's of those artists that historians have decided have made art that contributes to the idea of a national art. The discipline of art history was really founded to do this in different countries all around the world. So the idea of national art as being something important emerged really in the 19th century and remained central to art history, has remained central to art history, I think, until around the end of the 1960s. When you walk through galleries, you walk through this nice story of the development of a national tradition that might begin with the Impressionists, and it'll end around 1970, and you move out into another gallery just called Contemporary Art, where the nation seems to have disappeared from the idea, and artists are well interested in all sorts of things. And if anything, they're interested in regions or a sort of global histories or various thematic sort of things. So the idea of post-nation was to start thinking about what does that mean for both the tradition of art history being so embedded in thinking about what a national art is, and what does that mean for the future of the discipline. In Australia, of course, as everyone's very aware of these days, the big moment where the idea of a national tradition was called into question was when Papunyatula painting sort of hit the scene, because up until then Indigenous art was not part of the national tradition. Indigenous art was not Australian art. And even now we still have these two terms for these two different practices. So even though Indigenous art has become something that our national art galleries have collected in a big way and are clearly really interested in, they have difficulty thinking about it as Australian art in the way they hang it and talk about it. So one of the things we did in our post-national group was to try and think about that question in some of our projects. So even though post means after, we didn't mean it, and Charles and I were both conceived this together. We didn't mean it as if the nation has ended and we no longer live in a nation. There's no longer a nation state. Obviously, we live in a world of nation states, and national art isn't over. Rather, it was a sort of holding term to think about until we find a term which helps us understand really what now is the last 50 years, what do we name it? So it's a term more like post-impressionism, which didn't mean the end of impressionism, but a new type of impressionism. It's actually a term we don't know the meaning of, that we're searching to fill with content. This was our major CoVA project, going to Yirrkala, and Yirrkala is a major centre of Yolngu art in northeast Arnhem Land. There's several reasons why we chose Yirrkala, mainly because it has been so successful in the contemporary art world. And so the art that comes out of there and the artists that come out of there are quite well known in biennales and things like that. Another reason is that Yirrkala is very easy to get to. You can fly there, takes half a day. The third reason is that there was a particular artist there, Mr. Warrenby, who unfortunately has passed away since we went there, who made it his, one of his life's work really was that he really put a lot of effort into going out into the world to take, if you like, the message of the Yolngu to the world, and he was very involved in the University of Melbourne, often came down to the University of Melbourne. So we knew him, he knew us, and the Yirrkala project was, he really led the project in the sense that we organised it, but he was our leading figure who was there all the time, deeply involved and engaged in our conversation, in a sense who we'd look towards as an authority figure to give a whole new perspective on what we were talking about. There's a major artwork there that was painted back in the early 60s, which are called the Yirrkala church panels. These very large panels commissioned in the church with the cross in the middle of them, so they were what I like to call a transcultural project. The Yirrkala clans are divided into two moieties, the Dua and the Yirritja. So one panel are all the Dua clans, the other one the Yirritja clans with their major clan designs, their stories, and the stories are a bit like biblical stories, if you like. In doing that, they were making, in a sense, a claim on the church, on this introduced religion. They were, in a sense, integrating it into their stories, and it's a sort of it's no longer in the church. It's now in the art centre, in a sort of chapel-like place as a sort of holy icon of this important moment when the land rights campaign got underway. And up there, it inspired their very famous Bark petition, which was to gain land rights. So it was a very political artwork at the same time. And I'd been up there before and seen it, so I knew that these other art historians, because I know how art historians think, would be blown away by this major work. Who did the most with it is Terry Smith, the art historian of contemporary art, who went away and wrote this quite brilliant article that got published in eFlux, which I guess was our first major outcome of that CoVA project. The big thing that's happened, especially since the 70s, is that the Eurocentrism of the art world has completely exploded, to every region having its contemporary art biennale. The major museums always now wanting to have world art collections, not just very Eurocentric or American-centric collections. So Documenta is no longer a major art, contemporary art venue that up until the end of the 20th century was really just showing American and European art. Now it can't do that. It has to show all these regions. So I think the idea of the region is a very central idea now. It has been a central idea in art since the 21st century, and will continue. Yeah, and is of course part of this idea of the post-nation.
The Asia Pacific Artistic Research Network began in 2019, and it comes out of a long history of engagement with the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music here at the University of Melbourne, with Institute Seni Indonesia in Yogyakarta, with previous directors John Katapan and Barbara Bolt from Victorian College of the Arts have made a number of visits over to Yogyakarta. And with their encouragement, I was visiting there and met my colleague, Dr. Kurniawan Adi Saputro at ISI. They'd done a fair bit of work in the region, hosting a conference called the International Conference for Asia Pacific Art Studies. And they'd been looking to move into more of an artistic research framework. And so we thought, well, is there the opportunity for a network that might allow people to connect, outside of the individual nation states? Because obviously here at VCA, we have a long tradition of artistic research. We have people like Bolt who have been very influential in the field. Before I did my own research on history of universities and art schools and came to understand this problem, I had actually been working for United Nations agencies, United Nations Development Programme, UNESCO, on internet governance and digital media and technology for development across the Asia Pacific region. So for 2005, 2006, doing a lot of travel to a lot of different parts of the region and Why they chose me, I don't know, to be from this area, but it was a great learning experience because I really got to see the value that people gained out of being able to connect to people who were interested in the same kinds of problems that they were interested in, but from just from a neighboring country or somewhere else in the region where the history was slightly different and the dialogues were slightly different, but the underlying kind of problems, were often quite similar. When Kurniawan and I were talking, it was kind of like, well, we could do something like that. We could find a symposium or just a way to start to bring people together from across the region, and that would generate some value. We were able to bring people like Rex Media Collective into the 2020 event, and Yuki Kihara and Natalie King were able to talk, Lili and Heli Manati, who's a curator of choreography, and Java were able to convene panels. So we had a really rich kind of set of presentations for the 2020 event, and that's become the basis of the book, which we're soon to publish with Perimeter Editions as part of the CoVA series, and that book's going to be in English and Bahasa Indonesia, documenting that event. So that was a big event. It felt like it was like we went from our small 2019 kind of like gathering of interested parties into something that had bigger names and audiences and things like that. In 2021, we made the meeting about graduate researchers from across the region. So people who are involved in master's and PhD programs came together to share their work in a sort of very brief kind of format of kind of 5-minute presentations. We had about 50 students kind of coming together, and from everywhere from Aotearoa New Zealand to India and different parts of Australia as well, Indonesia. So that opened up maybe another angle for the network to think about what's its role when sort of working with graduate students and graduate programs and providing value in that kind of area, not just for sort of more established academics.
So I was involved in the CoVA Graduate Academy from, I think, 2020 and 2021. The main project that I was involved with was the podcast Gaps. We did a podcast episode that was focused on radical imagination in art practice, and we invited curator Adam Porter to speak with artists Carolyn Garcia and Eugenia Lim, and that sort of constellated our interests in, I suppose, technology on the one hand, as well as Asian diaspora and transnationalism. Like from the art object you can or an artwork you can go anywhere, that it sort of, I suppose, was a pathway to any other way that you wanted to really think about the world. I think about what the art historian Joan Key, who I've recently been reading, talks about as the sovereignty of the artwork, thinking about an artwork's sovereignty rather than its autonomy, which is her way of describing that the artwork is sort of sovereign to all of these extra artistic matters, so sort of informed by its socio-political context or its histories, but it's also not reducible to them. It is kind of sovereign of them. In the context of Hong Kong and my research, obviously Hong Kong was never a nation. It has been a territory and now a special administrative region of China, and in a way the lack of nationhood and lack of capacity or access to political sovereignty has made those questions sort of loom all the larger. And in the face of a political foreclosure of self-sovereignty, artists have often sought cultural sovereignty and looked to art in order to articulate and differentiate a local cultural identity, and in ways that is more of a practice of cultural nativism than nationalism, but I think that those ideas are very parallel or resonant with each other. Earlier this year, I co-curated an exhibition with a colleague, Dr. Duncan Calad, in Arts West Gallery at the University of Melbourne called After Image, New Media Art in China, Hong Kong and Taiwan. And the exhibition drew together the development of video art and new media art in that region. At the moment, I am working with Art in Australia and their study centre to extend the project into a sort of new iteration. So we've been very lucky to have the support of Art in Australia and of CoVA to commission some new writing, which is largely from other PhD scholars working in this space. And sort of, to have a range of creative responses to the exhibition, which will be hosted online, and also to make some of the research that went into the exhibition available online and sort of more interactive or living.
Hi everyone, I'm Miriam and I'm doing a PhD at the University of Melbourne in the Faculty of Arts in the Department of Art History.
I am doing a PhD at VCA Art in art practice at the South Bank campus. And I guess this is one of the great things about CoVA is that we get to do things with people from different campuses. Like I would never have met Miriam, even though she's working in an area that's very similar to me.
And that's precisely how we met, through the Graduate Academy that was founded last year in 2019. And it was founded with the goal of creating connections between graduate students from Parkville and VCA.
The CoVA Graduate Academy was this opportunity to be able to work with people that are not working on Singapore. Traditional practice of art history is very much about talking to your regional peers, or rather like area-specific peers. And so, I was having good conversations with people working in Singapore, on Singapore, interested in Singapore, or talking laterally through the Southeast Asia, which is the region that we would say Singapore is part of. And CoVA Graduate Academy and CoVA generally speaking as a whole, because the Graduate Academy I feel was very much part of CoVA, it wasn't a separate thing, was an area where I was talking to all kinds of people who are not working on Southeast Asia. Art history as a discipline already exists. Art historical writing already exists. We do already have full libraries of art history, and it is art history not just about European art or American art, and I'm talking about Europe and America because that was where the art historians were coming from. It is also art history written of the colonies. It is art history written of people that I presumably descended from. But it is art history that is not being written from a lot of perspectives. And so from what I can tell, art history moving forward is post-colonial. Art history moving forward is not about producing new work, so to speak, but it's about going over old material and then making sure those other voices are being heard. To close down art history departments today is to say that the chapter has closed. It is to say that there is only one perspective, which is the canon. And as we all already know, the canon is not complete. It is very much a universalizing gaze.
Currently working on a project called Soils with Tarawara Museum of Art, and that's a collaboration with the Van Ab Museum in Eindhoven and a curatorial platform called Struggles for Sovereignty based in Indonesia. And that's really trying to weave together histories of how museums and institutions are attempting to engage their own histories of involvement in colonial knowledge with emergent social movements that are trying to address specific kind of land-based struggles in their particular areas, and a lot of activists who are working to protect land are working out of a cultural practice where they see art in particular as being important as a way of, not just getting the message out there, but as a way of thinking through how humans and our social structure connects to the environment and to land and to really material practices there. The creative arts definitely has a role to play in addressing the university's historical blind spots. Universities have historically been elite institutions. That was the history of universities is the subject of my own doctoral study. And philosopher Jacques Derrida says that in the university without condition, where the university can get back to its fundamental position as a place that questions basic assumptions, that the university should be able to question the way we pose questions, or things like essays as a kind of form of holding knowledge, or why does everything we know have to be in a book? And of course, now that we're in the world of ChatGPT and automated production of text from large language models, I think it's interesting to see the university at large grappling with this. But in the art school, we've always known that not everything that you know can be written down in alphabetic language, and that's not the only kind of place for that. And also the creative arts is different than a lot of other university research because it operates in public. And so the works that are produced are not just going into an academic journal with a very small readership. It's going to what Thomas Hirschhorn called the non-exclusive audience. So that's an audience which may be focused on particular art worlds as a starting point. So it may be exclusive in that sense, but there are also places where anyone can show up. So when we have galleries like the ones that we're in at the moment, or performing arts venues that are here at the university, we're sharing with the broader community as well all the time. That's an important part of what we do here.
We are here at Paradise Camp, Yuki Kihara's exhibition from the Venice Biennale from 2022, now reconfigured and recurated at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. I've always found artists guardians of the imagination, and artists have taken me to places that I never expected. So working with Yuki Kihara, who is indefatigable, heavily politically engaged and socially engaged artist, took me to the small island of Samoa and the very particular and urgent issues that face that community that impact all of us, such as small island ecologies, climate crisis and intersectionality, as well as decolonisation. The project, including CoVA, who came on board to support the more pedagogical and educational dimension to Paradise Camp. Because for myself and the artist, it's not just about exhibition making, it's about discourse, dialogue around certain critical issues, enabling the Fa'afafine or transgender community. And with that in mind, we developed what was called Talanoa Forum, which was a 3-day symposium held in Venice at Ca' Foscari University of Venice with the Centre for Environmental Humanities. A delegation came from the Pacific, and it was the first time that scholars, activists, artists, poets and writers from the Pacific were in dialogue with their Venetian peers. A publication has longevity beyond the exhibition cycle and also can bring in other voices. So with Yuki's exhibition catalogue, published by Thames and Hudson, I was able to edit and commission a suite of new texts, including poems by Fa'afafines, an essay by Nahuya Te Wakotaku that looked at Gauguin from the position of the sitters, and really rethink aspects of art history. Because for those of us who are trained in art history, have been taught the European Western canon, and someone like Yuki Kihara inverts that canon and repositions it, upcycles the dominant Western patriarchal canon to think about what it might be like from a Polynesian perspective. In Samoa, there are 4 genders. There's Fa'afafine, Fa'atama, male and female. And it's this more fluid approach to gender and intersectionality that I think is revealed in the exhibition. The largest, most comprehensive and epic work made by Yuki Kihara for Paradise Camp. It was shot on location on a riverbed. I happened to be there. It was a very complex shoot because it has a whole group of Fa'afafine wearing very bright colours. The work is called Patches of the Rainbow, and it refers to a section of the Bible and the idea of the rainbow. But whereas in the West, the rainbow designates LGBTQI+, for the Fa'afafine and Polynesian community, the rainbow is the gateway between the mortal world and the afterlife. It's a very different kind of metaphor. For me, curating is less about exhibition making, but it's about relationships. And of course, the word curator comes from the verb curare, which means to take care. So I see my role as to take care of artists, their ideas, and try my best to fully resource and equip an artist with the capacities and the skills to realise their vision and their ideas.
I started teaching at VCA in 2017, and that's where I met Lisa, who was current head of painting, or acting head of painting. And we started talking about Maralinga, which is one of the sites of nuclear colonisation in South Australia, and how it affected my family. And then Lisa started Google Earthing the site, and we started talking about that story, and then also interests in architecture and spomenics and memorials.
Ioane was just telling the story of Maralinga and the history and how it informed your practice and the work that you made. I guess I was just live Google Earthing because I wasn't aware of the story. We were applying for research money to travel with no predetermined outcome. The first place that we went was Woomera before we even got any of the grant money to go to travel overseas, because Woomera is
It's my birthplace, so it was important to start there, I think. The field work was over how many countries we visited. It was like lost count now. But primarily it was the US visiting an exhibition. Then it was Wounded Knee at Pine Ridge Reservation, which is on Lakota Sioux country, and then moving to Ukraine because of Chernobyl, and then other parts of Eastern Europe that had old Soviet buildings, and then making our way back via Japan, but it was over like a course of technically 3 months, but split up over 12 months.
So Vicky offered us to edit Art in Australia.
Yeah, she was interested in the idea of the project and how it might be realised as a journal online with Art in Australia.
We thought we would commission a new piece of writing and use that money to commission a new text, and then alongside it republish something, because we were going through lots of historical stuff, or I'd collected images from other archives.
And it was always at the forefront that it would be an educational resource, and since it's been published online, a lot of academics from overseas have actually used it in their teaching. So that was exciting for us, I think, to discover that it was reaching outside of Australia, because it was a global discussion.
Yeah, so we had lots of writers and artists from the South Pacific and Mexico and other sites where nuclear testing had occurred. We would republish videos, archival films,
maps, photos from our own archive from the research trips.
Making more visible a history that is harder to locate. Maralinga was considered, I guess, no one's place, and they had one man go to try to clear it before they started the testing.
This man employed by maybe the Australian, or probably the British military to move on as many Aboriginal people as possible from the area, because they were in this rush to detonate their first bomb, and so he was given around 10 days to circumnavigate, if that's what you call it, South Australia, on the hunt to move on Aboriginal people, but also that site itself was chosen because it was assumed that there were no Aboriginal people living in the area. It's important to talk about that because a lot of people don't know about and still don't know about the nuclear tests that happened in South Australia. And people seem to think it only just affected that particular site, but depending on which way the wind blew, those toxic materials travelled all over the state.
All over Australia.
And all over Australia. When Lisa and I started this project, it was 2017, and then was impacted by the pandemic, but it hasn't stopped the project moving forward. We're still talking about it.
Artworks provide that longevity because of how they exist rather than a 24 news cycle or something.
Yeah. There's so many similarities in terms of Indigenous people, First Nations people have been disregarded in terms of genocide, nuclear colonisation, displacement, and how it's important to address the issues that still are impacting those nations as well. It just shows how important it is, you know, to visit those places and talk to people, and that's what Lisa and I have done on this project and hope to do more of it in the future.
The importance of place, I mean, with regards to me, it's about like, how do I fit here? What cultural memory are we fostering or protecting or keeping rather than ignoring? Yeah, and I feels like that's what the project's about, that intersection of memory and how it's constructed, and examining it and pulling it apart and looking at the power structures and who's affected, what has been lost, what can be reclaimed.
Yeah, reclamation. Yeah, definitely. Of history.
Yeah, of history.